All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we're going to be continuing. So we were doing the different du'as. We did as-salatu ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam ba'da tashahud. We did that yesterday. And today we're going to talk about the du'a that we would do after tashahud al-akhir. So what does that mean? So we're talking about not in the second rak'ah, but we're actually talking about the tashahud that we would do at the last rak'ah. Okay, so that's what would basically be at the last rak'ah, and that's what we're doing. So that's that dua. So let me just break it up for you. I'm going to make sure that you would get both of these screens because that's what we were doing before. So bear with me because we need to learn Allahumma. Here we go. So this is after taslim. Let me just find it for you right there. And this would be Remembrance of Islam. And we did, no, I think this is it, right? And that would be number 55. Let's do it. Number 55. Here we go. Allahumma, and here we go. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr wa min adhab jahannam ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر فتنة المسيح الدجال. Let's see. Could see this hadith was narrated in Bukhari and in Muslim. Okay, what does it mean? O Allah, I take refuge in you from the punishment of the grave, from the torment of fire, from the trials and tribulations of life and death, and from the evil affection of al-Masih al-Dajjal. Okay, so Allahumma, oh Allah, I seek refuge in you, min adhab al-qabr. What do you mean adhab al-qabr? Is there adhab al-qabr, like is there a certain punishment in the grave? How do we understand this? So why would there be a punishment in the grave? I thought it was going to be just the hereafter. How do we understand this? So that's what we're going to be explaining right now because it's important to basically learn about adhab al-qabr. How do we understand this? Is there any evidence in the Quran that there's adhab in al-qabr? So that's what I'm going to take you to. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet ﷺ, had basically taught us in those ahadith to make the dua in the last tashahud. And right after it, after we're done, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad, etc., before you say Salamu alaykum wa rahmatullah, Salamu alaykum wa rahmatullah, you would make this dua. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من عذاب القبر ومن عذاب جهنم ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر فتنة المسيح الدجال. In short, in English, Ya Allah, I seek refuge in you from the torments of the grave, from the torments of hellfire, from the different trials of life and death, and from the evils of the evils and the trials of al-Masih al-Dajjal. Al-Masih basically means the one that will wipe on something. We'll talk about what. And al-Dajjal is basically the imposter or called the Antichrist. Okay, we'll talk about him. Okay, let's see. But first, let's break that down. When we say adhab al-qabr, what does adhab al-qabr look like? And is there such a thing as adhab al-qabr? Is there an evidence about adhab al-qabr? Okay, so in general, adhab al-qabr is definitely ghaibi. What does ghaibi mean? It's basically part of the unseen. In other words, even if you were to put a camera and, I don't know, surveillance cameras in the grave, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to see anything because this is ghaib. This is part of the unseen. Any details in regards to the angels, munkar, nakir, and the questions and all of these, you're not going to see anything. You're not going to see anything because you are in this dunya. This is ghaibi. Okay, so what about that? Is there any evidence in the Quran that adhab al-qabr is real? I heard that there are these scholars that said that there was no such thing as adhab al-qabr, the torments of the grave. So In general, Ahl Sunnah and al Jama'ah, majority of the scholars of Ahl Sunnah and al Jama'ah, they say that there is something called the torments of the grave. That there is something called torments of the grave. And where did they get that from? They said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا ويوم تقوم الساعة أدخلوا آل فرعون أشد العذاب. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that they would be exposed on hellfire throughout the day and throughout the night. And on Judgment Day, or on the day of resurrection, or on the day of the last hour, they would be told, put in and bring in the family of the Pharaoh to the worst of the torments. So they said, well, here's what we would get. النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا, throughout the night and throughout the day. Well, there's no night and day on Judgment Day. So this is talking about night and day in this life, or at least in between this life and the hereafter. غدوا وعشيا. Well, does that really prove it? So they said, sure, I've got another evidence. وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ, and on the day that the last hour would happen, basically, that is Judgment Day, they would be told, put in and throw the family of the Pharaoh and give them the worst of the torments. So what did they mean by that? They said, well, what you would say is that when it said, وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ, so this is basically taking us into a chronology, that this is what would happen, and they would be exposed on a certain type of fire that is in the grave, and then later, that is right there, وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ, and later, on Judgment Day, they would basically get the worst of the torments. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Al-Qurtubi said, majority of the scholars would see that this ayah is related to al-barzakh. Let's look at this word, al-barzakh. What is al-barzakh? Al-barzakh is basically the life in between this life that you're living and Yawm al-Qiyamah. So it's this transition between this life and Yawm al-Qiyamah. There's a midlife. That's al-barzakh. Al-barzakh was after you die, is when you would be in this mid place called al-barzakh. Okay? And majority of the scholars had actually said that majority, okay, or some scholars also said, النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا. This is as long as basically this world still exists, they would be in the grave, yet they are not seeing the light and the sun and then sunrise and day and night, and they wouldn't see that. But the truth of the matter is that they are in al-barzakh, but this is to let us know, the ones that are not living in al-barzakh and living in ad-dunya, that they are throughout the night and throughout the day actually living such a torment throughout the night and throughout the day of our night and day, but they are actually living in al-qabr, in their own grave, and actually getting such torments. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. And that's why it said, وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ. And on that day, when the sun, day of judgment happens, then they would be told, أَدْخِلُوا, and enter. And then with this أَدْخِلُوا is basically telling us that they would be given an order, that is, the malaika would be given an order to forcibly have the Pharaoh and his allies, basically, and his people, be put in أشد العذاب, the worst of the punishments. Okay, let's see. There is a hadith. So this is an ayah. There is a hadith, al-Bara ibn Azib. He said that the Prophet ﷺ said, إذا أقعد المؤمن في قبره أتي ثم شهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله And فذلك قوله يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت. رواه البخاري. All right, here we go. Here's the hadith. This hadith basically quote says, if a believer is set in his graves and then he was brought forth, and then he testifies or gives the testimony that there's no God worthy of worship but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Muhammad is the prophet of God, and this is the actual interpretation to the words يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would keep the believers steadfast with the steadfast or the strong, or at least the words of testimony, the words of steadfastness, the words to make you grounded and strong. And that is basically narrated in al-Bukhari. Let's see. In another narration, it said يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة. That it was revealed in regards to al-adhab al-qabr, that it was revealed in regards to the torments in the grave, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in regards to the interpretation for this ayah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give the believers steadfastness with the strong words in this life. So if it's in this life, are we talking about the life that we're living, or we're talking about, no, we're talking about what? We're talking about we're talking about those that are in al-barzakh, basically. In regards to those there in al-barzakh, we're living in our life, we're living our day and night, but they're living in al-barzakh. And in the hereafter, they would be also kept steadfast in being firm on the words of the words of Tawheed, basically. Let's see another hadith. عن أنس رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال صلى الله عليه وسلم لولا أن لا تدافنوا لدعوت الله أن يسمعكم من عذاب القبر يا ربي. The Prophet ﷺ said, if he were basically to let us hear what is happening in terms of torments within the grave, he would have made it possible for us to hear it. But if we were to hear such sounds of what's actually happening in the graves, we would have probably never wanted to put anybody in the grave. That's so scary. And that's why al-Tibi had said, لولا أن لا تدافنوا, meaning if you were to hear it, you would have actually not put anybody in the grave. You would be afraid of even doing so, or approaching it, or even doing that. But it certainly, oh dear. Oh, just give me a second. Oh dear. Okay, I'm used to hurricanes. Assalamu alaikum again. Used to hurricanes in Minnesota, but not hurricanes in Malaysia. So this is quite new to me. Okay. Okay, let's continue right there. So I'm just making the story short. And of course, are the torments in the grave exclusive to the disbelievers, or are they including the believers as well for the sins that they might have committed? So you would say al-Qurtubi had quoted Abu Muhammad Abdul Haq that he said, no, that the torments in the grave are not exclusive to the disbelievers, and it is not at all just going to be for the hypocrites, but it also would include a group of the believers, and each one would be subject to whatever they had committed. Basically, that's going to depend on what they had committed and whatever sins that they had committed. That's going to determine what type of torments they would be getting. And Ibn Taymiyyah had quoted. By the way, Ibn Taymiyyah, to be honest, is one of those scholars that I would say was really abused. And it's quite sad that you would have some scholars really literally wage a war on Ibn Taymiyyah like he is the most dangerous figure. But Ibn Taymiyyah, I would say, is one of those scholars. Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Hazm, got a couple scholars that I would say were not given the appreciation that they deserve, and would be really interesting and really fun if we were to take one scholar and some of those scholars. Maybe we'll do that one day, Noura, and talk about like different biographies of different scholars and take one scholar at a time and just talk about them. That'd be really interesting. That's something that, inshallah, we need to do that one day. And Ibn Taymiyyah is definitely going to be one of those. Al-Mawardi is going to be one of those. Ibn al-Arabi is going to be one of those. Oh, I would love to talk about those. Okay, let's see. Quote, he said, in proving the reward and the punishment in al-Barzakh, which is the time between dunya and the hereafter, all right? And of course, between death and Yawm al-Qiyamah, it's basically the words of majority of as-Salaf. What are we talking about Salaf here? We're not talking about the Salafiyya, the organization Salafiyya, but this is talking about the Sahaba, this is talking about the companions, this is talking about a lot of these, basically that would translate as the predecessors. So we're talking about the Salaf, meaning the ones that came before us and had they traced back and transmitted basically the information, tracing it to the Prophet. And that's basically Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the only ones that denied al-Barzakh, or at least, what we were talking about, are basically few from the innovators. And certainly, let's see, Ibn Abil Izz, man, that book, we had to study the whole book. That was in my graduate years. It was 500 pages. And we had to literally memorize the whole book. It was Sharh al-Tahawiyya in 500 pages, and literally just study the whole thing for Abil Izz al-Hanafi, the Ibn Abil Izz al-Hanafi, for Sharh al-Tahawiyya. Let's see the quote that he had said. قد تواترت الأخبار. What is tawatarat? Meaning that there are a group of a number of different resources, different information, different ahadith that go back all the way to the Prophet ﷺ, which prove the torments of the grave and even the blessings in it, or at least the reward in it, and whoever was deserving the blessing in the grave. And that there would be the question of the two angels, and therefore we are obligated to believe that these things will happen on Judgment Day. Oh. And we're obligated to believe in that, and we would not necessarily speak speak in details. When we say لا نتكلم في كيفيته, this isn't necessarily literally to speak in it, but this is to engage in details which we don't really know of and invent our own interpretation. We just let it be and we just recognize that this is what it is and we just believe in it as is. Why wouldn't we go in details? Because our mind is not capable of interpreting or even understanding the details because we don't actually know and have access to this information. So therefore, it continues and still stays within what is considered as ghaib. And certainly, الشرع, and we know that the text itself did not necessarily give us the information to help us know the details, so we would leave it as is. So in the end is that we would basically see that the text itself may contain some ambiguity and we wouldn't necessarily know all the details. Okay, let's continue right there. So that's why the sunnah is to make the dua. The Prophet ﷺ, you could see this hadith is in al-Bukhari. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يدعو ويقول اللهم إني أعوذ بك من عذاب القبر. You could see this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ used to make the dua and say, Ya Allah, I seek refuge in you from the torments of al-qabr. So if there is عذاب قبر, then that's why the Prophet ﷺ would make the dua. But if there wasn't عذاب قبر, if there wasn't any torments in the grave, then it would make no sense that the Prophet ﷺ would make a dua in asking for protection from the torments of the grave. Okay, so that is another hadith to prove that there is something called عذاب القبر. And that it's not legendary, not something that is mythical, but it's actually real. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Let's see, Ibn al-Qayyim, who's actually a student of Ibn Taymiyyah. But one thing I would say about Ibn al-Qayyim, a lot of, I would say, mystical influences you would really find in the books of Ibn al-Qayyim. Okay, what did he say? Quote, he said they would be, when we're speaking about, well, who is going to be and what is the torment in the grave going to be as a result of? Why are these people going to be punished in the grave? Why the grave punishment from the beginning? He said, because they would be punished for their ignorance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or perhaps being negligent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders, or perhaps committing the sins, for the Lord Almighty would not punish the soul that would love and know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even the soul that is committed to the rulings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or that avoids and leaves what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid. And certainly he would not harm or would not punish the body that was committed to the Lord Almighty. For the torments of the grave and the torments in the hereafter are as a result of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not being content over a servant. So whoever had basically caused Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to curse them, or at least caused Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not be content over them in this life, that is in this dunya, and then did not repent and died on that, then in that situation, they would be subject to the torments of the grave as much and as basically dependent on the amount that they had basically they had not gained, or at least they had caused Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to curse them for. So some would have a lot of that penalty, and some would not have a lot. And some would be in the testimony of faith and being basically committed to the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and others would basically deny. So what are the things that lead to adhab al-qabr? Number one, there is a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had basically passed by biha'at. What is al-ha'at? By a garden. And it was a garden in Medina or Mecca. And then he heard two people that were getting tortured in their grave. And the Prophet ﷺ said, and they're being tortured, and it wasn't of something necessarily magnificent. In other words, it wasn't something that was considered as a big deal, but he said, كان أحدهما لا يستتر من بوله وكان الآخر يمشي بالنميمة. The first one was someone that was not avoiding from their urine. So they were not considerate over purification. And the second one, the second person that was getting that punishment, was a person that was engaging in gossip, continuously engaging in gossip. Okay, that was narrated by al-Bukhari. So what is that telling us? Number one, this hadith would tell us that there is something called the torments of the grave. And this basically would tell us that, hey, the Prophet ﷺ did affirm that certain behaviors do lead to the torments of the grave. And one of them is basically just like a person not avoiding impurities and not taking purification as a serious matter. And the second one is basically engaging in gossip and just talking about that gossip and basically living their life just talking about she said, he said, and passing it on and talking about people. Let's say the Prophet ﷺ also said, لا يدخل الجنة نمام. Well, wait a minute. So is it namima? What's the difference between al-ghiba and the namima? Oh, al-ghiba would be to say anything that would hurt someone else. So what, like what? Like, for example, me talking about wafa and say how, I guess, how fat she is, or how rude, or how stingy, or how mean she is, or how ugly, or how, anything that relates to making her feel ugly or making her sound or appear. And of course, that would be behind her back. So whether I'm talking about her, about the way she talks, about her behavior, about whatever it is, okay? Or even about her things, or her car is ugly, or her car is so old and rusty, whatever it is, okay? That would basically be considered as ghiba. What is ghiba? Ghiba, anything that anybody would hate. Okay? I would hate that you would talk about the way that I might do my hair, or the way that I might cook my food, or etc., for example. And that would be ghiba. In namima, on the other hand, is engaging in gossip. So what would that mean? I would tell you, the other day, I heard Wafat say such and such about you. And then I would go to Wafat and basically take, let's say, I guess, another name, Samia, okay? And I would say, hey, Samia, this is what Wafat said. And it just basically just engaging in this words and this gossip, telling Wafat what Samia said and telling Samia what Wafat said, and then putting in all this engagement and just basically engaging in this continuous talk and just confusing people's relations. That's namima. Okay, that's a namima. The second one is al-ghulul. What is al-ghulul? Al-ghulul is stealing from what is really booty. What is booty? In the aftermath of a war, okay, there would be some, whether it's items, belongings, perhaps even weapons that the enemy might leave behind. Whatever the enemy leaves behind, that becomes government property. That becomes government property. And that property is distributed based on a number of different rules of distribution and who gets how much and all of that. But in the end, if somebody is to take this property, okay, and hide it, that's ghulul. Okay, so they didn't say anything about it and they just hid it. And certainly the government didn't yet do all the, the documentation of each and every single item yet. So the government would not actually know of such properties or such items that were left behind. So therefore, you would have somebody abusing that and probably taking it and stealing it and so forth. And that would be ghulul. Okay, so let's see. Al-Madin alladhi alayhi dayn, the person that owed money to someone else. Okay, they would also, Ya Allah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rabbi, for those that are not capable of paying up their debts, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the ability to pay their debt. عذاب الميت ببكاء الحي. If the person that is dead, his family is crying over him. So what does that mean? I mean, they're the ones that are crying. Why does he pay the price for this? Okay, so is that going to be as a result that he is harmed, kind of like in this life, somebody could be harmed psychologically. Is he harmed, meaning that he is punished, or is the loud sound is basically affecting him? What does that look like? That's where the scholars had differences of opinions. Is it that that's harming him? The sound is harming him? Or is it no, since unless he made the will to have the people cry over him, to wail, to say certain poetry, to do a certain kind of a dance or a certain kind of wailing, if he made the will and he asked that people would do that, then certainly he would be punished for asking them to do that. But if no, he did not tell them to do that, they're just doing it on their own, then they would be the ones held accountable. So this is just in general. Let's go back to that dua, okay, and break it down again, okay? Let's see that dua again. And Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr wa min adhab jahannam ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر فتنة المسيح الدجال. من عذاب جهنم. Ya Allah, I seek refuge in you from the torment of hellfire. This one's clear. فتنة المحيا والممات. فتنة المحيا والممات. From the different trials. Wait a minute, what's a fitna anyways? Is that like a torment? No. الفتنة is anything that can be murky. It's not clear, and then it becomes like a trial. You're not really sure why this is happening. Or when you're talking about fitnatul mahya, the different trials during life, il-mahya means during life, and il-mamat means during death. So المحيا والممات. So المحيا would be life, الممات would be death. So a fitna during life, a fitna during life would be the type of fitan that could be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَبْلُوَكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ fitna. You are trialed with shar, with evil. That's a clear one. نَبْلُوَكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ. That's an ibtila. That's a hardship. But can khair be a fitna? Yes, even good can be a fitna. You probably getting a job, maybe getting very smart children, maybe having a beautiful house, maybe getting a good car, maybe the money and your business is working out for you. That's basically a fitna. You never know. It could be a fitna and it could be not a fitna. Who knows? So it depends on how you relate to it. It would be a fitna if it led you to getting distanced away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if, for example, you used that money or you used the pain that you're going through to get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you had turned al-ibtila into something that would get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe, hey, you had a death of a loved one, but through this death, you probably started out a new life, getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And perhaps this wealth, someone can see this wealth as, I have this wealth and I can use it for using and going through haram. Or the person can use this wealth to probably donate for a good cause, make something good happen, or probably invest in something good. So what happens? Now this would not be a fitna anymore because the person used it for a good cause. Okay? So when you say, اللهم إني أعوذ بك من عذاب القبر ومن عذاب جهنم ومن فتنة المحيا والممات, you're actually asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for whether we're speaking about evil things or whether we're speaking about good things that you're given in this life or in your death, that it would be basically kept for a good cause, to what leads to a good ending, to what leads to a good result. That's what you're asking for. You're asking for in this life and the hereafter, whatever thing that happened to you, whether good or bad, that it would be for a good cause and for a good purpose, and in al-mamat, that your death, we would make the du'a to let this death be a comfort from any pain that might come, from any fitna that might come. Yes, I would rather be dead than lose my faith, if I had lived longer. No. اقبضني إليك غير مفتون, if you had willed that others would be in fitna. So take me as basically decree death on me if fitna and trials were going to be prevalent and get me into dying and death, basically, before fitna coming to me, before trials coming into me, and before me being affected by this, and make me amongst those that would be committed on faith. وَمِن شَرِّ فِتْنَةِ الْمَسِيحِ الدَّجَّالِ, and from the evils of the trials of al-Masih al-Dajjal. Wait a minute, so what's al-Masih? Al-Masih means to wipe something. Well, I thought al-Masih means Christ. So al-Masih means to wipe something. Prophet Isa alayhi salam is called al-Masih, as the Messiah, as the one that will wipe or bring the prevalence or the spreading of peace. المسيح الدجال, he will spread something else. He will spread falsehood. He will spread delusion. So المسيح عيسى ابن مريم, he will spread, here's the words المسيح, المسيح عيسى ابن مريم, he will spread peace. المسيح الدجال will spread delusion, will spread Dajjal. What is it, Dajjal? Dajjal basically is to mean an imposter. Okay? So we're making the dua, Ya Allah, protect me from the delusions and from all the different things that Dajjal will cause. That Dajjal will cause, and make me amongst those that would be committed to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically make me committed to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted me to commit to, which is Jannah, which is Akhirah, which is Allah, which is Tawheed. So that's what we're making the dua for. That's what we're making the dua for. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to right there just make this page be the main page that we're doing. Okay, so here we go. And that way we're going to basically end right here. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr wa min adhab jahannam wa min fitnati al-mahya wal-mamat wa min sharri fitnati al-masih al-dajjal. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr ومن عذاب جهنم ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر فتنة المسيح الدجال. Slower. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من عذاب القبر ومن عذاب جهنم ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر فتنة المسيح الدجال. This is it, everybody. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت and اللهم آمين for the dua. And barakallahu fikum. I know it was a long night, so inshallah I'm actually thinking of starting even earlier, perhaps at 9 a.m. my time, and that way you won't have to stay up all night. What do you think?
جزاك الله